Welcome everyone. Before I start, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you get all our new summaries. And let's begin our film. The story begins on the border of the Chinese kingdom of Qin. There were two merchants with a group of orphaned children heading to the city to sell them as servants. But suddenly, General Oki appeared. Oki was the king's military commander and was so powerful that one of the orphaned children, named Shin, was captivated by him. He promised himself that he must become a legendary warrior like him someday. After a short while, Shin arrived in the city and was sold as a servant to a man who owned a farm. Here, the man introduced Shin to Hugh to teach him how to work. Hugh was a good-hearted boy and became Shin's only friend. However, the problem was that Shin complained to him every day, saying he wouldn't be a servant anymore because he wanted to become a strong warrior. Hugh told him that the only way to achieve this goal was to master the art of swordsmanship. So, they trained every day in the forest, using wooden logs instead of swords, hoping to escape a life of poverty and become great warriors. After many long years, the two grew into teenagers and became very skilled. But in the middle of their training, Shin suddenly noticed an old man watching them from among the trees. Hugh said he might be one of the king's retainers because his clothes looked expensive. A short while later, when Hugh and Shin finished training and returned home, they were surprised to find the king's retainer talking with the farm owner. He asked to take Hugh to become one of the royal guards. At first, Hugh said that Shin was just as strong as him and should come with him, but the king's retainer informed him there was only a place for one trainee and gave him a full day to think it over and make his decision. At night, Hugh was hesitant to leave his dear friend, but Shin told him to go on his path to achieve his dream because this opportunity wouldn't come again. So, Hugh left to train with the royal guards. As for Shin, he continued to train more and more because he wanted to prove his strength to everyone and wanted to reunite with his friend, Hugh, as soon as possible. His power increased so dramatically that the farm owner was astonished by him and couldn't believe his eyes when he saw the weights Shin was lifting. Not to mention that he could split stone using his wooden sword. Then, one day after Shin had poured all his strength into training, he returned to the barn to sleep and rest. But he was surprised by a scratch on the door. When he opened it, he found his dear friend Hugh collapsing into his arms, drenched in blood. Of course, Shin was shocked and couldn't understand what was happening. Hugh said that the king's brother had started a rebellion and killed all the guards, but he managed to escape at the last moment. After that, he gave Shin a map and asked him to follow it because the king needed his help. At first, Shin kept crying bitterly over his dear friend and begged him to gather his strength and get up again, but it was no use. In the end, Hugh died. Shin got angry, took his sword, and started running through the forest at top speed to follow the map and carry out his deceased friend's last wish. At that time, the traitorous king's brother had taken control of the palace and ordered all the soldiers to track down the king and eliminate him, no matter the cost. Meanwhile, Shin was surprised when a group of bandits surrounded him from all directions. He used his incredible swordsmanship skills and defeated them easily. After that, he followed the map until he reached a tent in the darkness. As soon as he entered, he was shocked to find Hugh sitting there, still alive. Naturally, Shin was stunned and couldn't believe his eyes, because Hugh had died in his arms. But suddenly, out of nowhere, one of the assassins appeared and attacked. The assassin wanted to kill the young man who looked like Hugh, because he was the real king. It was then Shin realized that the king's retainer had taken Hugh with him to use him as a decoy and protect the king from the assassins, due to their resemblance. Shin became enraged and began fighting the assassin, because he had killed his friend Hugh instead of the king. Unfortunately for Shin, the assassin was able to overpower him and knocked him far away, as the assassin was very skilled. But Shin gathered his strength again, channeled his anger, and managed to land a decisive blow, eliminating the assassin. After the battle, the king apologized to Shin for using his friend Hugh as a decoy and causing his death. However, Shin did not accept his apology and said he would help him, only to carry out his deceased friend's last wish, nothing more. As the king and Shin were trying to hide from the traitorous soldiers, suddenly a person wearing a strange mask appeared and blocked their path. This person was an orphaned child living in the forest named Karyoken. He offered to show them a secret hiding place in exchange for a monetary reward from the king once he regained control of the kingdom. The king agreed to his request. He led them to a hidden cave, far away from everyone. Along the way, Shin lost his temper and started arguing with the king for using his friend. It was then the king said that he had told Hugh his life would be in danger and informed him that the assassins might kill him. Yet, Hugh had agreed happily and felt proud. Shin's anger subsided because he had thought the king deceived Hugh and lured him without his knowledge. From that moment, Shin remembered his friend's words before his death and decided he must help the king regain his rule and protect him, no matter the cost, because if Hugh were alive, he would be proud of him. At that time, the traitorous king's brother was about to explode with rage and kept berating his followers because they were unable to capture his brother. But suddenly, General Oki appeared. Oki was the strongest general in the army, and no one could defeat him. Unfortunately, he was a traitor and offered to eliminate the king in exchange for a large sum of money. The king's brother agreed to his request and ordered the armies to assist him in his mission. Meanwhile, Shin and the king followed Karyokin until they reached a place in the forest. There, they were surprised to find someone shooting tranquilizer darts at them. This person was one of the assassins sent by the king's brother and attacked with lightning speed. Shin drew his sword and fought bravely. Although Shin's experience was limited and he was young, he was distinguished by his tremendous determination and extraordinary talent. Because of this, he managed to overcome the assassin and defeat him in the battle after great effort. But in the end, he discovered he had been hit by a poison dart in his chest and lost consciousness. After many long hours, Shin woke up from his coma and discovered that the king and Karyokin had removed the poison from his body and treated him. It was then the king said his only hope of regaining control of the kingdom was to meet General Shubunkin. Shubunkin was a loyal general, and if he knew the king had been betrayed, he would help him and fight against his brother. The next morning, Karyokin and the king were preparing their equipment when suddenly Shin asked them to lower their voices and prepare for battle because there were soldiers nearby. As soon as the soldiers entered the place, they realized they were loyal to the king and had been searching for him all along. It was then General Shubunkin finally appeared and kept crying because he had failed the king and couldn't stop his traitorous brother. The king forgave him and asked him to regain his focus. At that time, the Mad King's brother had prepared his armies and wanted to invade all the neighboring countries and start wars with everyone. Not to mention, he revealed to his soldiers that he had a gigantic monster of a fighter with him and promised them he would destroy anyone who stood in his way. Meanwhile, General Shubunkin and the rest of the soldiers enjoyed the food Karyokin had cooked for them and rested from their fatigue. But the king asked the general about the location of his remaining followers. Shubunkin said that after they had separated from him, General Oki revealed his treachery, ambushed them, and eliminated a large part of the army. However, due to Hugh's courage and valor, he managed to lure Oki and his soldiers, making them follow him because they thought he was the king. Of course, Shin felt pride and happiness when he heard that his friend Hugh was a legendary hero. He told the king that they must move quickly to reclaim the kingdom. At that moment, General Shubunkin had a clever idea. He said there was a tribe of warriors living in the mountains who had separated from the kingdom many long years ago. If they could convince them to fight, they would help them in their battle against the king's brother. So, Karyokin used his knowledge of the mountains and led them to the location of this tribe. As soon as they reached them, masked warriors suddenly appeared and surrounded them from all directions. These warriors spoke a strange language, but Karyokin understood their tongue and asked to meet their chief. Indeed, the tribe of warriors took Shin, the king, and their remaining followers and brought them to a massive palace in the mountains. There, the king stood before the tribal chief, who wore a terrifying mask. Initially, the king explained the situation to him and asked for his help, but the chief refused, saying they had separated from the kingdom 400 years ago and would never return. The king promised all the money and land he could want in exchange for his assistance. It was then Shin used his skill and escaped from the guards. Afterwards, he told the tribal chief that the king's brother was insane because he would start a war against everyone, and if they didn't unite, they would all die in the end. At that moment, the tribal chief felt Shin's courage and self-confidence and finally agreed to help. But when he removed his mask, he revealed himself to be a beautiful girl. Shin and the king were shocked, and they celebrated with the rest of the warriors because the battle would begin soon. Indeed, the king and the chieftainess devised a very clever plan and decided to use their intelligence to defeat the traitorous king's brother. The next day, the royal palace guards were surprised by an army from the mountain warrior tribe approaching them. But they hadn't come to fight. They said they wanted to make a peace treaty and unite with them in the war. Of course, the king's brother thought this was an opportunity not to be missed because the mountain warriors were very strong. It was then we realized that the king, Shin, and the rest of the soldiers were in disguise, dressed like the mountain warriors, waiting to enter the royal palace to begin their attack. But the guards were clever and said that only the chieftainess and 50 fighters would enter the palace, while the rest of the army would wait outside. In the end, the plan succeeded. As soon as the chieftainess, the king, and Shin entered through the gates, they waited for the right opportunity and launched their attack. They managed to take down the guards one by one, but they were shocked to find thousands of soldiers against them, while they only had 50 fighters. So, the chieftainess, the king, and General Shubunkin went in one group, while Shin and Karyokin went in another. The chieftainess and the king fought all the soldiers in their path to distract their attention. Meanwhile, Shin and the rest of the mountain warriors sneaked through a secret passage because they wanted to reach the traitorous king's brother. However, they were shocked to find the guards waiting for them, and the battle began. Initially, Shin and his followers fought bravely. Even little Karyokan fought and defended himself as well. Just as the mountain warriors started to gain the upper hand, suddenly the monstrous fighter, whom the king's brother had revealed to the army, appeared and began his assault. Not to mention, he was distinguished by his gigantic size and tremendous strength, and he started crushing everyone. He cornered Shin and was about to finish him off, but one of the mountain warriors risked his life and saved him at the last moment. Shin then gathered his strength, tricked the monster, managed to stab him in the neck, and finished him off. Meanwhile, the chieftainess displayed her own tremendous strength, helping the king and General Shubunkin in the battle until they reached the palace courtyard. There, they were ambushed, and half of their followers were killed by arrows. At first, Shubunkin said they needed to retreat and save themselves, but the chieftainess revealed her true plan. It was then we learned that the fighters who were hit by the arrows were still alive. They had cleverly tricked the guards and surrounded them from all directions. With that, they managed to overpower their enemies, even though they were outnumbered. At that time, the king's brother was feeling anxious and kept talking to his aides, but he was surprised by Shin, Karyokan, and the rest of the mountain warriors as they stormed the place. Of course, the king's brother was terrified and asked for help from General Saji. Saji was the strongest swordsman in the kingdom, and no one could stand in his way. So, he grabbed the mountain warriors and eliminated them one by one. He told Shin to run, saying he would finish him off too, but Shin didn't give up and started fighting non-stop. Unfortunately, Saji overpowered him because of his immense experience and unparalleled strength. As Shin lay destroyed on the ground, he began to remember his friend Hugh. He remembered his promise to him to help the king return to the throne, so he gathered his strength and stood up to Saji. From that moment, Shin displayed incredible, unmatched power. He grabbed Saji, crushed him so badly that he broke his sword, and finished him off in seconds. The king's brother got scared and decided to flee the place, but as soon as he reached the palace courtyard, he discovered that the king and the chieftainess had defeated all his followers. The king then struck his brother and taught him a lesson for causing the death of so many people. Shin arrived and felt proud because he had fulfilled his promise to his friend Hugh. But suddenly, General Oki, the strongest general in China, appeared with his massive army and completely surrounded the area. Naturally, Shin was in awe of his tremendous presence. At first, Oki asked the king, "What will you do if you seize power?" The king said he would unify all the neighboring countries, stop the wars, and exert his utmost effort to help the poor and weak. Oki respected him for his words and revealed that he wanted what was best for the country and that he hadn't been a traitor. Not to mention, he destroyed the remaining followers of the king's brother with a single strike of his glaive. Before he left, Shin told him that one day he would become a powerful warrior like him. Uki was pleased with him and asked him to meet him as soon as possible so he could train him himself, because he was a brave young man with a good heart.
And that concludes today's film. Don't forget to like, subscribe, share, and hit the bell icon to stay updated. Share your thoughts in the comments and stay tuned for the next summary. Goodbye.